This is time to begin. I welcome you all to this Group Theory Sangam talk. Our speaker today is Dr. Geeta Thangavelu. She is a professor at IISER Thiruvananthapuram, and today is going to speak on Kurzweil duality and diagram algebra. Professor Thangavelu, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Manoj. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. So today I made this lecture more or less like a survey talk because this is a century-old technique, but still it is the most active field which many people are working. So what I'm going to do is I'm just trying to explain what the classical Kurzweil duality, which is originally defined by Schur in 1901, and then a few developments in this direction, and then I confined my work in this direction to maybe 2 slides. Just I will briefly say about that because there are already a lot of things to go through. So this is much more in a informal kind of talk. Okay. So I just begin with the few basics which we can go through quickly. So throughout this talk, we can assume the underlying field is the complex numbers, or even any algebraically closed field will do. So we have a vector space and there is a bilinear form on V. Suppose if this bilinear form is trivial, or sometimes we take non-degenerate symmetric bilinear form or skew symmetric bilinear form, and when we look into the group of isometries of this bilinear form, which leaves this, so the group of transformation that leaves this bilinear form invariant. So these groups appears to be for the trivial bilinear form, it is the general linear group, and for the symmetric one, it is the orthogonal group of transformations, and for the skew symmetric one, this is the symplectic group of transformations. And the isomorphism classes of these groups depends only on the dimension of V. So we just denote them by GLN. So whichever field we are working, we can just put the general linear group over that field. So here complex numbers we are working. I'm dropping in the notation, but it is understood that it is GLNC, ON of C, or the symplectic group, and the dimension have to be even for the symplectic group, otherwise there is no such things exist. Okay, so these groups collectively called, they are called the classical groups, and the action of G on this vector space, the group of transformations on this vector space, is called the standard classical action, and we call always V the standard module for G. So now I'm just to begin with, so we have a infinite algebraic groups, which are the classical groups. Now throughout this talk, this finite group symmetric group, which is the permutation group on D letters, it going to play a crucial role in understanding the representation theory of the classical groups. That is the beauty of this duality. So let me quickly recall what the symmetric group representations are. So I denote SD to be the symmetric group on D letters. Then the inequivalent irreducible representations of SD are indexed with the integer partitions of D. So you have given any D, you have the integer partition. So we are indexing that many representations there. And to each partition, we can associate a corresponding Young diagram, which I will explain in the next slide. So the irreducible modules of the symmetric group are indexed with the Young diagrams, and the basis for the corresponding irreducible representations are given by the standard Young tableaus. So what are these Young diagrams and standard Young tableaus? For a quick recall, if we take the symmetric group, D is 3, S3, then there are 3 integer partitions, which is this 1, 1, 1, and 2, 1, and 3. So the Young diagram is the one in which it have lambda I boxes in the first row lambda. So here the lambda i's, I mean, the first one is lambda 1, lambda 2 and lambda 3. This one is lambda 1 and lambda 2. This is just lambda 1 is there. So that many boxes in the row. So given a partition, you have a Young diagram. And corresponding to the Young diagrams, you have that module associated with that. That module have basis indexed with the standard Young tableaus. What is this? So the standard Young tableaus are, you can fill the numbers 1 to D in row wise and column wise increasing. So this is called the row and column standard. So we can call this as standard Young tableaus. So there is a very well developed theory for this symmetric group representations. Actually, this is a family of groups. So studying them all together makes sense. And that's why these representations are coming from certain kind of the Young subgroups, which are the row stabilizers of these Young diagrams. Okay, so we have a well-defined theory for at least for the complex numbers. Over the complex numbers, we know very well. And for
excuse me, Geeta, is it possible to enlarge the screen?
Okay.
I'm not
So,
able to read carefully. Thank you.
Can you get now? It's it,
yeah, better. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. So now, so what happens is, if you take this Young picture, Sn acts on it just by permuting the entries in the picture. If you do the entries here, so in that way you have a module for that, and the row stabilizer subgroups of that. For example, this one is S2 cross S, the symmetric group on one symbol 3. So while inducing the trivial representation of these Young subgroups, you will get a modules for the symmetric group, and from which the irreducible modules of Sn are constructed. And there is like when we move to the positive characteristic also, we are trying to understand how this works. Okay, so the Schurwell duality, initially we are starting with the complex numbers. So right now the theory for the symmetric group is known. Now we make use of this information to pass on some information to the classical groups. So that is the duality says. So what is this duality? So this is the initial problem posed by Isai Schur. So he was interested in studying the polynomial representations of GLN. So this is in his thesis dissertation. He investigated this problem, and later on in 1927 he rederived the same one in a more economical way. So what this duality says is, we take V to be the n-dimensional vector space. So C to the n will do here, and the G is just the general linear group, the group of all invertible linear transformations. Now I have an action symbol should be there, which is missing. So G acts on V just by matrix multiplication, and then we extend this action to the tensor product. So you take V D times tensor product with V itself, then G acts on this V tensor D with the diagonal action. So individual entries it acts. Now on the other hand, so this is the one action we have. On the other hand, the symmetric group on D symbols acting on this tensor space just by permuting the tuples. It's going to permute the tuples. Now this two actions, group actions, induces the following representations. Let me first denote the endomorphism of HV to be the, so for H any group you take, the end HV is the subalgebra of the endomorphism ring, which comprises of all operators that commutes with the H action, where H is an arbitrary group. So I just want to move to the another slide where I have the action. Yeah. Oh, maybe. Sorry, I should have wrote there, but anyway. Yes. So this GLN acts on the end V tensor D, so that you have a map from GLN to end V tensor D. Similarly, symmetric group acts on the tensor space, so you have another map from this, and this end G V tensor D is those operators. So you have this image of GLN coming inside as an operators. So you look for those operators which commute with this image of GLN. These are called the end GLN V tensor D. Similarly, if you pull the image of symmetric group inside, then you are looking for the centralizers of that. Okay, so this is what I want to say there. Okay, so this is the endomorphism algebra. So Schur proved the following. The general linear group, it should be N. The general linear group and the symmetric group both acts on the tensor space, and these two actions commutes. So whether you act this first or that first, that doesn't matter. And each action generates the full centralizer of the other. So the phi is the representation given by the action of G, and the psi is the representation given from the action of ST. So this is what I have just explained. So the image of CG is simply the centralizers of ST, and the image of ST is the centralizers of the GLN thing. Now, as a V tensor D as a GLN SD bimodule, what he has proved is it is a direct sum of some L lambda tensor M lambda, where this L lambda are modules for the GLN and M lambda are the modules for the SD, and all of them are non-isomorphic. So there is no repetition coming up, there is no multiplicity coming up. So it's a multiplicity free decomposition, which is really carries lot of information on this duality. And when you just so this is a decomposition in terms of bimodule, but when you just decompose as a module for GLN, what happens is the same GLN module appears with multiplicity coming from the dimension of this module, symmetric group module. And the same thing is happening here. When you decompose with the SD module, then the same symmetric group irreducibles coming with the multiplicity coming from the GLN module. The dimension of the GLN module is the multiplicity of this irreducible here. So here you observe that the dimensions and multiplicities appear nicely, and the information about one side will determine the other side. For example, what this means is, suppose I have just only the one action, GLN acts on V tensor D, and I am decomposing the space like this. Then this will give me the information on there should be a corresponding modules whose dimension is this multiplicity, and it comes with the multiplicity is this dimension. So just one side of the action will determine the other side of the action, and vice versa. And the multiplicity freeness sets a bijection between the modules of GLN and ST. Note that they are indexed with the same index set. And this module is in, so suppose you take the module categories of GLN and the module categories of SN, just you take the irreducibles, then there is a bijection out of it. Okay, so you can associate them really. Now the Schur algebra, which is defined as just the centralizers of ST inside the endomorphism ring. That means the image of GLN. That is the Schur algebra. So initially, Schur didn't have this written up like this, but initially what he started with is he started just with the Schur algebra definition, and he proceeds on. And later on only he derived this in this format, like you have this two actions and this two commutes, and you get this decomposition. So the original question was, he was interested in understanding the polynomial representations of GLN. So what do you mean by that? So a representation V is said to be a polynomial representation if and only if the action of each G in GLN on V is given by a fixed family of polynomials in the entries of G. So that is, if you have a basis such that the functions Fij from GLN to C defined by it's coming from the action of G, then this Fij should lie in the polynomial algebra of n square indeterminants. For example, you take V to be the C to the n. This is one example of the polynomial representation of GLN. Now the question is, why one would look into the polynomial representation of GLN? Why it is so interesting? So for sure, each degree D, we get the bunch of irreducible representations of GLN, and it's a lot of them because the D grows as big as, and you get for each degree D, you get a bunch of irreducibles for GLN. So this is a nice place to look at.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
On slide number 8.
Okay.
In this decomposition, you have written lambda partition of D with at most D parts.
Yeah.
So this shouldn't be, this should be n parts. At most n parts. Because lambda is partition of D, means then you will have all the partitions of.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. So now Schure's main result is every polynomial representation are completely reducible, and each irreducible one is a homogeneous one given by some degree D. So basically, you can decompose any polynomial representation in terms of this homogeneous one. And the homogeneous ones are given by this Schure algebras. So when you fix n, and then when you vary over different D's, you really capturing the different D degree polynomial representations of GLN. At the same time, you can vary the n also, so that this duality really captures a huge family of representations. And from the fourth, from this four, what Schure has said is, as I said earlier, the equivalence type of irreducible representations of GLN of fixed homogeneous degree are in one-to-one correspondence with the partitions of D into at most n parts. Here I made a mistake. Okay. So what is happening in this Schure duality? It is actually connecting the two different situations. One side you have an infinite algebraic group. On the other side you have a finite symmetric group. And this duality is passing the information from one side to the other. So basically, the if you tell in the modern language, you can say that the category of GLN modules and the category of SN modules are equivalent. This is what this duality is doing. So this result, why it is called Schure-Weil duality is, after Schure's result, Richard Brouwer have started studying the similar duality by extending to the subgroup of GLN, and he had the description of the centralizer algebras. But then it's Weil who took his approach, and he is the one who popularized this. So in his very famous classical group books, he has written down for the other classical groups called the orthogonal groups, symplectic groups, which was already done by Schure and Brouwer. So people now used to call this as Schure-Weil duality. And recently, in 2005, Mugel Menders have given a combinatorial rule for the structure constants of Schur algebra, although it looks very abstract setting. So he gave in terms of bipartite graphs how to give the multiplication rule, and you can really get the structure constants out of it. So in 2013, in my joint work with Amritanshu Prasad, we try to understand this Schur algebra a bit more. Then we got a new description of the structure constants of Schur algebras. Together with, we also described the center of the Schur algebra in a very combinatorial way. Just whenever you are given with two basis elements, using balls and box pictures, you can do it. I didn't put that here, but I can give the reference at the end. So recently with Amritanshu and Shraddha, what we have done is, you have the symmetric group action on the tensor space. So when you restrict this action of symmetric group to alternating groups, then what is the Schur algebra on the other side? So basically you are looking for something bigger, and this was already studied by few people, Regev, Henke, like that. So when the parameter, for example, when there is this parameter n and d involves, so whenever the parameter n square is bigger than or equal to d, the new Schur algebras are nothing new. They coincides with the existing one. But on the other hand, if you look for the n square strictly less than d, those there is a non-trivial part coming up other than the original Schur algebra part, and we were interested in studying that. And initially we started working on getting the multiplication rule and structure constants inside, and together with the Shraddha combined, we really gave a simple interpretation and much clearer understanding of the Koszul duality functor on the category of polynomial representations of GLN. So this alternating group really gives a nice interpretation of this. So this is the recent work little bit we have done on the Schur algebras. Now, before I'm going to the diagram algebras part, we initially begin with the complex numbers. Then what will happen over the other fields if you move to the different field? Then several attempts have been made for establishing this duality in the prime characteristic. So Kanjaini and Prachesi have proved this for the infinite field of arbitrary characteristic in 1976, and Dave Benson and Stephen Doty also have established this duality over finite fields, provided that the field have at least d+1 elements. Now, there are a lot of generalization of this duality is there. So basically, you can establish the duality with a different group action and the centralizers on the other side. But throughout this talk, what I am interested is just I begin with the classical Schur duality and then restricting that duality to the subgroups of GLN, and I'm going to look for the diagram algebras which comes out of this duality, and this have a very nice connection to the invariant theory questions of the classical groups which we begin with. So this diagram algebras really comes from the description of the invariant theory of the groups. At the same time, it also answers the pending question that we cannot answer directly from the invariant theory technique. So it's like a twofold. We arrived at the algebra through the invariant theory of this classical groups, and we are going back from this algebras to answer some questions of this invariant theory problems on the same classical groups. So GLN have interesting subgroups, which is the orthogonal group, just the orthogonal matrices sitting inside, and symmetric group also sitting inside just as a permutation matrices. So row wise, column wise, you have only one, remaining else are 0. And the corresponding centralizers are, so in the classical Schur duality, we got the centralizers of GLN is the group algebra of the symmetric group, and the corresponding centralizer algebras. This was the work done by Richard Brouwer in 1937. So this centralizer algebras are named after him, called the Brouwer algebras. And later, in like end of 70s or 80s, there is called this partition algebras comes. But this is quite interesting. Is the algebras are defined from the statistical mechanics perspective. Martin and Vaughan-Jones independently defined these algebras, and later it turned out to be the centralizer of the Sn when you restrict the action of GLN to Sn in the classical Schur-Weyl duality. So lot of connections to this is there, and these algebras, the Brouwer algebras and the partition algebras, can be combinatorially defined in terms of multiplication of diagrams. So these algebras have a basis having bipartite graphs or a little more partition. For example, Brouwer algebras and symmetric group algebra can be viewed as a bipartite graph. And the partition algebra is like a 2-row graph, but it's not bipartite. And you have a multiplication rule, which you can define combinatorially. But this is easy to study compared to working on the GLN side of the Schur-Weyl duality, because this have a more combinatorial structure behind that. Now, Richard Brouwer, initially, he also didn't start with the Schur-Weyl duality, but he was interested in the tensor invariance of ON. So when orthogonal group, when you restrict the GLN action to the orthogonal group, he is interested on how O of n acts on the V tensor D, and he is interested in the invariance of that. So orthogonal group comes with a bilinear form, which is non-degenerate and symmetric. So this allows us to have a lot of identification inside the vector space. So you can identify V with its dual, and V tensor V with the V tensor V star, which is like again end V. So lot of identifications, and even the end GV tensor D can be identified with the G invariance over the V tensor D. So a lot of identifications are there. So with that, it is the first kind of diagram algebras coming up out of this duality. So what is this Brouwer algebras? For this action, you have the corresponding representation phi. Now, let me denote the image of this algebra to be the A. A is just the image. So this is in the GLN case, this is the Schur algebra. So here it's something smaller than that is there. And the Brouwer algebra is defined to be the centralizers of the orthogonal group. So Brouwer algebras will really come from the symmetric group side. You are looking for the centralizer. Now, is there any nice description for this centralizer, which will allow us to get more information on the orthogonal group representations itself? So that is the question asked by Brouwer. There comes the connection to the invariant theory. So the algebra B is unknown, and Brouwer showed that finding a basis for, so he just tried to characterize the linear transformations in end V tensor D that commutes with the linear transformations coming from ON. So he just work on the simple rule like the commuting actions. Then he arrived at finding a basis for this centralizer is equivalent to the problem answered by the invariant theory of ON. So the basis for B is obtained from the basic invariance of the orthogonal group. That is the description he obtained in that 1937 paper. So what is this fundamental theorem of invariant theory? So the first fundamental theorem, which is usually called FFT, it always tells about the basis for the invariant ring, and there is a finite number of them. And the second fundamental theorem of invariant theory, which is called SFT, usually deals with the ideal relationship among the invariants. So from the usual invariant theory technique, whenever ON acts on a vector space, you can try to find the basic invariance, right? So the FFT of ON says that every invariant is a polynomial in the inner products. This I will say why you have this two different things coming up. So in the previous slide, what I have mentioned is you have this identification. In fact, this is an isomorphism there. So inside end V tensor D, you are looking for the centralizers. So this can be done with V tensor D tensor V star tensor D. So there are n basis vectors for V and n basis vectors for the V dual will come, and he used that description because throughout this work of Brouwer, he mindlessly used this all this equivalences. So here, if you think U as this co-vectors, which is from B, and this Xi is this contravariant vectors, which is from the dual, then what FFT says is every invariant is going to be a polynomial in the inner products, and every term of this polynomial must contain each of the vectors Ui and Xk's exactly one. This is the description very crucial for the Brouwer pictures. So each invariant is actually a linear combination of products of the above form. So you have this all this like you have this tensor space V tensor D tensored with V star tensor D. So you have this I and K varies from 1 to D. Then each invariant is a linear combination of the products of the above term. If you take Ui's on the top row and Xk's on the bottom row, and given just a basic invariant, say just one given product, I will take the top and bottom row. There is a line joining between them whenever they got paired in the scalar product. So I will give an example. So the Brouwer picture comes like this. So if you have product of so Ui is on the top and Xi is on the bottom, and whenever you have a scalar product, say for this comes from a scalar product where U1 and U3 product appears, and X1 and X2 appears, so like this. And then any other invariant would be the linear combination of all such pictures. So for any D in the Brouwer algebra, you have this TD, which is in the tensor space. So this can be identified with the 2D tensors in this way. So D dots on top and D dots on bottom. And he also gave a multiplication rule, which really comes from the multiplication rule of the, so in the endomorphism ring, you have the multiplication rule. So he tried to bring out the multiplication rule, which we can see diagrammatically there. So how many such possibilities are there? Once you have, this is a bipartite graph, right? So once the thing is fixed, you have 2D minus 1 options. And then the next is fixed, you have 2D minus 3 options, like that. So this is going to be a finite dimensional algebra with this dimension. And note that this algebra depends on two parameters. Now you can see how D plays the role here, but I'm going to show you where the N also plays a role here. So what Brouwer have proved is, as a ON BDN, so he defined this abstract algebra, which is consisting of the pictures, and there is a multiplication rule on it. So as a bimodule, ON BDN bimodule, it is a direct sum of the modules from tensors of the modules from ON as well as from BDN. Okay. So he established a duality here, and the same thing can work here, like the GLN case. If you decompose just as an ON module, you will get the ON module with the multiplicity coming from this Brouwer modules. Similarly, if you decompose as a Brouwer module, the multiplicity comes from the ON dimension of that ON module. So that duality still holds here with some additional conditions here. Okay.
Sorry, I have a question here.
Yes.
So how come this is a bipartite graph? These diagrams?
So what the invariant theory says is you have the scalar products. So it is UIs are like the top part. Whenever you have say U1 and U4 are there, you connect U1 to U4, and this one from top and one from bottom, and this is both are from bottom. So what this FFT says is it always pairs a covariant with covariant, a covariant and a contravariant, and one contravariant and the other contravariant. So this is the rule coming from the FFT of ON. So there is no other option. You always have a pairing. That's why it's coming like this. Okay.
Yeah, but for the bipartite graph, you need a bipartition, right? And inside a partition.
Oh, I see.
it's not
Sorry.
divided.
So yeah, you are right. So I should say that this is a graph with unique one edge between the two vertices. I should say that.
You can say these are the matchings. Right?
Sorry.
You can say these are the matchings. Perfect
Yes,
matchings
yes.
or matchings.
Yeah. Okay. So in this thing, inside this, you can even identify the symmetric group algebra inside that. Just all the vertical edges will be there. We will see in the coming slides. What is that? So although this Brouwer algebras comes as centralizers of the orthogonal group, these algebras can be defined independently, just like an algebra. So you take or any ring with unity and delta is an invertible element in R, then the Brouwer algebra on D vertices with here it should be delta, there is no longer n, can be defined independently, and its representation can be completely understood from the representations of symmetric group. For example, if you take the Brouwer algebra on 4 symbols, you have 4 vertices. So whenever you have a horizontal edge or all horizontal edges, there is the symmetric trivial symmetric group S0, zero symmetric group is there. When there is one vertical edge, one horizontal edge, you have symmetric group on 2 symbols, which is considered just the vertical edges. You take it as the subalgebra, say S2. And similarly, if there is no horizontal, and these all of them with the one horizontal edge, 2 horizontal edge, this all of them will give the entire Brouwer picture. Similarly for B5, so whenever it is odd, the odd symmetric groups will come. Whenever it is even, the even symmetric groups will come. And in mid-70s, after Vaughan-Jones results, there is this Jones basic construction and a lot of techniques available where they study this algebra completely, the representations of this using the representation of the symmetric group. And the Schurwald duality for this says that the module category of ON is equivalent to the module category of the Brouwer algebra. So for example, if you take B3N, these are the all possible pictures available. And how the multiplication rule is done, you put one, for example, if you want to multiply this two, you put one above the below. Some people will prefer the notation above, or some will prefer below, depending on the action. So you connect the middle part. You connect the middle part here, and then whenever there is a closed loop inside, this is a small picture, so there is one closed loop. So n to the power 1 will be there. Suppose it is a big picture with 2, 3 entirely inside loops are there. you take that many powers outside and then you trace back. So this is connected, right? So this is left as it is, this is left as it is. When you join this, this is coming as this age. This is the multiplication rule. That's why even if you defined it over any arbitrary ring, you can put delta here, then it will come with delta powers. So this is a huge family of algebras, because you can vary delta, at the same time you can vary the d's, which is the size of the Brouwer. So it's really a huge family of algebras. So now, what is the connection to the FFT and SFT here, as I mentioned? So when n is greater than or equal to 2D, the centralizers, means the end GLN, V tensor, D, this centralizers are exactly isomorphic to the image of SD here. And similarly for the Brouwer algebras, whenever the parameter is n is bigger than or equal to 2D, this side is an isomorphism actually. The action on this side is always faithful, but this side, whenever the parameter n is strictly 2D, there is a non-trivial kernel existing on this side of the algebra. So usually the centralizers are quotients of Brouwer algebra and quotients of symmetric group. Okay. So what it says is, now BD of n is the orthogonal invariance on this tensor space. So the FFT, answer for FFT is just the BD of n in case of the thing. But when n is smaller than 2D, you really need to understand the ideal relationship among the invariants. That means the action of BDN will have a non-trivial kernel, and that kernel will really defines the ideal relationship among the invariants. So from the Schurwald duality, directly identifying that kernel is a non-trivial problem. And people really, even over complex numbers, these algebras are not semi-simple. So it depends on the parameters. So whenever, if you just define BD del, unless it is n, they are no longer centralizers of orthogonal group. They are just a general algebra. But even over complex numbers, these algebras are not semi-simple. Then people have tried to parameterize in what set this algebras are semi-simple and for what set it is not semi-simple. They have the parameterization, and they really try to understand the, whenever there is a non-trivial kernel is there, they try to understand this using the invariant theory techniques, but not fully succeeded. Then there comes
I have a question.
yeah.
So for the first isomorphism, I think n is bigger than equals to d is enough.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay.
That's right. And the things which goes to kernel is like more than that, you know, the n
More than n
parts.
parts. Yes.
Those things will go into the kernel. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So this one, this side you really have a non-trivial kernel, and then now we want to study this. Like, we really interested in the SFT of ON, which is not obtained from the usual Schurwald duality. Now there are a lot of generalizations which are available. So as I mentioned, when you restrict this, here you have the classical Schurwald duality. So the other things are Brouwer, and the partition algebras are little more bigger than Brouwer. Then there were so when you replace the module with appropriate groups, for example, the wreath products, it is the partition algebras which is colored with the elements of G coming up. And very recently, the work by Shraddha and Ashish Mishra, they have given a partition algebra which is coming from the complex reflection groups. So lot of new duality is coming, and it's not just because of we are restricting, we got the algebras, diagram algebras, but the diagram algebras itself coming from a very different background, and it happens that it is in Schurwald duality with this nice groups. So as I mentioned earlier, this Brouwer algebras or the symmetric group algebras, this is a huge family of algebras. And over complex numbers, somehow we have a data for that. But what happens when you do the field extensions? Is there a way to go from the information what we have in the complex numbers to the finite field or the field extensions where we begin with? So there comes this cellular algebras, which were introduced by Graham and Legrer in 1996. So these are the class of finite dimensional algebras, which is defined in terms of some cell datum and 3 axioms. So it's a kind of, you have to fit that algebra into this datum. You have to identify from the representation theory of the algebra over complex numbers or over any splitting field into this cell datum, and then later all the results will be systematically studied. So that is the idea. So a general, once you do that, you really have a general description of the irreducible representations together with when the algebras are semi-simple. So this is particularly created for studying the diagram algebras, so that many non-semi-simple part of it is there, right, in the huge family. And later in 1998, there is a homological approach, like completely basis-free definition was given for this cellular algebras. And since all the algebras are coming from Jones basic construction, Goodman and Graber in 2010 have introduced a version of cellular algebra which is fit into, it's a kind of cellular version of Jones basic construction. So I can just quickly skip this definition. So the cell datum, what it is actually, you have a partially ordered set which is supposed to be the index set for the irreducible set, and for each poset you take an element. For example, symmetric group, you take this is to be the set of all partitions, and then when you fix a partition, you have this index set which is supposed to be the index set for the basis of that module. So these are the called, you can simply say it as Standardian tableaus to be this set. So you come with a basis, it's all given in your cellular structure. Once you have this, then you can deal with that algebra very nicely. So this is coming with a basis together with an action. If you take A as an A module over itself, there is an action coming up and there is an involution also sitting. Okay. So this is actually modeled carefully on the symmetric group representation. So for the symmetric group representation, there are two very nice bases. One is called this Jucy-Murphy basis and the other one is called the Kastan-Lustig basis, which allows you to study the representations over a different field. So the coefficients really carries lot of information. So this entire setup is modeled on that. So for example, matrix algebras are cellular with the elementary matrices as cell basis and the matrix transpose as the involution. And I can skip this due to lack of time. So what this cellular algebra does is, once you have this cellular structure, you can really able to, for each lambda in that poset, you can create a module which is called the cell module and a bilinear form which is completely defined on this cell module. And all this values, really this coefficients comes from the cell structure which you begin with. That is the information you already had. So using that, actually you can define the radical and you can even say the classification that whenever R is a field and your poset is finite, you can have a complete set of pairwise inequivalent irreducible A modules, which you can got from the cell modules. So cell modules can be studied systematically, and out of that, every time you have a bilinear form, even when you switch over different field also, you can work on that bilinear form to get. In general, this is really a harder problem to look at, but people still looked at it and they got very nice results out of it. So in my joint work with Frederick Goodman, we introduced a variant of notion of cellularity called the cyclic cellular algebras. So you can call cellular algebra is cyclic cellular if the cell modules, whatever you have created, going to be cyclic. And you know, although this looks stronger than the normal cellular version which they have defined, all the existing algebras fell into this category except the one we begin with, for example, the Reith product groups. So the Reith product groups, you need that whenever, so that is the result we have proved. So whenever you have A is an R algebra, so it will include abelian groups or non-abelian groups, whatever there. Then the Reith product is, we have defined to be the semi-direct product of this A tensor D and ST. So ST just acts by placing permutation in this way. So the main theorem which we have proved is, this is a cyclic cellular algebra. Whenever A is a cyclic cellular algebra, then all the Reith products are cyclic cellular. So in attempt to study the, so in the earlier Schur-Weyl duality, what I have mentioned, you have this Brouwer algebras, partition algebras, and there are Brouwer algebras with the vertices indexed with the group elements, say the Z2 or the cyclic group or any abelian group or any general group. So there are Brouwer algebras. So if you do it with the cyclic group, it is called the cyclotomic Brouwer algebras. And whenever you do it with, for example, this colored partition algebras and all, they have the group elements in the edges, and when you concatenate, means when you multiply two elements, you take care of the multiplication of the group elements also there. So in attempt to understand the cellular structure of this Reith product, we really came across this definition of A Brouwer algebras, which is a kind of Brouwer algebras where the elements are indexed with the normal algebra which have a star invariant trace and all. So what we have proved is that A is a, whenever A is a cyclic cellular, then this A Brouwer algebras are all cyclic cellular, which really gave a uniform proof for all known kind of generalizations for the Brouwer algebra which exist in the literature. Now, what is the idea here of using the cellular structure? So as I mentioned earlier, in the so this part have a non-trivial kernel. So the person who defined the cellular algebras, the same Legrer and Zhang in 2012, what they have studied is this Brouwer algebras are cellular. Then they try to understand the kernel of the action of the Brouwer algebra on the tensor space. Then using the cellular techniques, which we already, I have showed, what they have find is, in fact, this kernel is generated by a single idempotent. That idempotent is a combination of a lot of Brouwer pictures. So in that way, they got a description of the kernel of the Brouwer algebra, and that description gives the ideal relationship among the invariants, which is the second fundamental theorem of invariant theory. That too in the finite case, like when you move over the different field extensions, you got the result. And this is like one of the breakthrough result we got recently for the orthogonal groups invariants. So every time the Schurwald duality is producing what is more than what we expect out of it. Although it is a classical setup, now people just try to replace the vector space with some modules, and then they look into the one side of the algebra, the other side of the algebra. And I'm telling you, like, even for the other diagram algebras, it's not so easy to get the diagram algebras description as like the Brouwer algebra. Sometimes it's complicated. At the same time, whenever you have a diagram algebra, understanding the centralizers back also a bit complicated. But if we do so, this Schurwald duality really gives a lot of information from the both side. So the cellular technique really, so this BDN comes from ON invariance, but now from the BDN we go back to the SFT of ON. So it is like going on the one side and coming in the other side. So these are the overall techniques I really like to present today. And now, any questions?
Thank you very much, Gita, for this very nice talk.
Okay.
And it's a time for interaction now. Please put forward if you have any questions, comments, or questions.
Yeah, hi. So you just mentioned that probably it may not be easy to describe in terms of diagram algebras the centralizer of an algebra, so acting on a vector space. So I'm just curious that you mentioned about Schur algebra of alternating groups. So I mean, is the partition algebra of alternating groups given in terms of diagrams, or is it too difficult to?
No, that
give
description is not known yet. Even though Matthew Bloss gave the, so just he did the Schurwald duality. So one side, when you restrict the GLN side, that is Sn, and when you restrict further the Sn side, then you have this alternating group acting on it. But he has this from the Schurwald duality technique, he know what is the dimension of the algebra on the other side, but he don't have the description of the algebra as of like diagrams. So that was, and initially this is the original question when we started with the Amri. Then we just shifted, we couldn't get much enough in this side, so we shifted our focus to the other side of SD, like, so restricting from SD, we looked into the alternating Schur algebras.
Okay,